The Last of Us Part 2, a Naughty Dog game, written by Neil Druckmann and Haley Gross, and directed by Neil Druckmann. Hello everybody, welcome to this week's episode of The Story Mode, a pop culture-based YouTube channel focused primarily on analyzing stories and story structure. This week, we're talking about The Last of Us Part 2, both the good and the not so good. Before I get started, I'd like to give a couple of disclaimers. Firstly, this video will be filled with spoilers, so if you have somehow not heard what happens in this game, stop watching, play the game, and decide for yourself. Finally, I always want to preface these videos by acknowledging that writing a compelling and cohesive story is an incredibly difficult thing to do. As a writer myself, I know how terrifying the blank page can be, and how easy it is for a writer to get lost in his or her own ideas. So with that said, this is not a critique of the writers themselves. Rather, this video will look to analyze the strengths and weaknesses of the narrative from a story, character, and pacing perspective. So with all of that out of the way, what did I think of The Last of Us Part 2? It's a really solid game with an extremely disproportionate story filled with pacing problems and consistent attempts to subvert the player's preconceptions. From a purely technical perspective, The Last of Us Part 2 is incredible. The environments, character designs, atmosphere, tone, and gameplay are all amazing achievements, and they should most definitely be commended. But then why did so many gamers, myself included, feel so disappointed once the credits rolled? For me, it comes down to two key elements: preconceptions and pacing. It's probably not shocking to anyone watching this that the first Last of Us game had a profound impact on me, as I'm sure it did most of you. I've always been a gamer who prefers a well-told story over revolutionary new gameplay or hundreds of hours of content. Not to say that both of those things can't make for incredible games. More often than not, they just aren't as important to me. So when I played The Last of Us for the first time in 2013, it was a perfect storm. Simple yet fun gameplay, impressive graphical work, and above all, a flawlessly paced, uncompromising story that puts its strong, complex characters in a morally ambiguous world that somehow gets the player on board with every questionable decision that they make. It instantly became the pinnacle of video game storytelling for me, and in my opinion, has yet to be passed by any game since. So when the first trailer for The Last of Us Part 2 dropped in 2016, I couldn't have been more on board. And even through multiple delays, my excitement level was through the roof. From nearly every trailer, it looked like Ellie was going on a revenge rampage, and I couldn't wait to see what happened. I was so excited that when I heard the entire plot of the game leaked online in 2020, I avoided everything. I didn't know a single spoiler when I started the game. So you can imagine my surprise when Joel is murdered within the first 2 hours of the game. All of those trailers for the last 4 years have been smokescreens. Ellie wasn't going to avenge Dina, she was going to avenge Joel. Now when all of my preconceptions of a story from the marketing are completely subverted, my first instinct is never, I hate this. This story that I'm about 1/15 through sucks and I'm never playing it again. I usually take the opposite standpoint. I side with the writers and think, okay, where are we going with this? And ultimately, the first 12 hours of this game went to a relatively satisfying place for me. I genuinely love what happens during these first 12 hours. Ellie's brutal and unforgiving murder rampage seemed perfectly in line with everything I'd already understood about the world of The Last of Us. Was I crushed and more than a little disappointed that Joel was killed so early on in the game? Yes, but I also felt the revenge story being told was compelling enough to warrant it. Even though my personal hope was that the game's story would follow the arc of the several incredible flashback sequences we get between Seattle days, I couldn't help but be fully enraptured by Ellie's all-consuming grief, which bled brilliantly into me as a player. Even though Ellie was obviously becoming unhinged, I couldn't have been more on her side. In the most basic terms, they killed Joel. They needed to die. It didn't matter that Joel left his fair share of bodies in his wake for selfish reasons. We knew as players of the game, as observers of both the heroic moments and the not-so-heroic moments of Joel's life, we knew that Joel was a good person at heart. We knew all that he had lost, and we still cared for him despite his flaws. So as Ellie journeys through her seemingly endless quest for vengeance, we stand by her because despite her flaws, we've observed her at her best, and at her best, she's the Ellie we've grown to love for the past 7 years. The Ellie who fights for those she loves. And although she might be rough around the edges, she's earned our respect and our forgiveness. And because, as the player, I'm willing and able to justify her actions, I could not wait until she confronted Abby. How was Ellie going to cap off her revenge? What type of horrors did Neil Druckmann have cooked up for us when their paths finally crossed? And then it happens.
Shit. Jesse, stand up! Hands in the air, I shoot this one too.
Don't you do it, Ellie. Get out of here.
Stand up! Now!
Don't you fucking dare!
Shut the fuck up! Fuck. All right. Stop! Stop. Toss your weapon. Toss your weapon! Fuck.
No.
I know why you killed Joel. He did what he did to save me. There is no cure because of me. I am the one that you want. Just let him go. You killed my friends. We let you both live. And you wasted it.
And it all comes to a stop.
Dad? Dad? Dad! Come on. Dad?
4 years earlier. Oh, okay. We're gonna figure out why Abby hated Joel. Probably has something to do with the Fireflies.
Abs? You got a little mud on you there, sweetheart.
So do you.
Where?
Right there.
Uh-huh. Okay, yeah. She has a dad. Alright.
Is he still in the fucking building?
Is that...
Abby.
No!
Abby, don't look.
Dad! Dad! No! No!
Okay, so Joel did kill her dad. I kind of figured it was something like that, but that was some good context. But let's get back to the Ellie Abby fight. Like, I want to see what happens there. Seattle, day 1. Oh God, no. No, please tell me we're not doing 3 days as Abby. God.
Abby. Oh. Easy. You okay, Abs?
No, please. Oh God. Oh, burritos? Okay, Neil, what are we doing here? Come on, you're not going to make me replay all 3 days as Abby, are you? That took 12 hours as Ellie. Fetch? Oh, Jesus. Yep. We're really doing this, aren't we? I just want to find out what happens to Ellie. Remember those hypotheticals I mentioned right before those last few clips? How was Ellie going to cap off her revenge? What type of horrors did Neil Druckmann have cooked up for us when their paths finally crossed? We don't get a single one of those answered for another 12 hours. Neil, Naughty Dog, you had me. I was slowly getting over Joel's murder. I was extremely emotionally invested in Ellie's revenge story. Why are we discarding all of the momentum of Ellie's story so that we can learn the backstory of our villain? A quick flashback like the zebra scene was fine, but 12 hours? This obviously leads me to the pacing part of this video's title. It's mind-boggling. The game flowed so well, why interrupt the flow? Stories have rhythm and momentum just like everything else. Have you ever watched a football game where your team is playing at its absolute peak for 45 of the 60 minutes? And then in the first drive of the fourth quarter, they go 3 and out, punt, and then the other team drives down the field and scores a quick touchdown. And in that moment, doubt starts to creep in the back of your mind and you think, uh-oh, this doesn't look very good. Then they lose. That's kind of like the second half of The Last of Us Part 2. Whether you can get on board with Joel's murder or not, I think most players can admit the first 12 hours of The Last of Us Part 2 work really well. all of the pieces of The Last of Us' typical storytelling puzzle fall into place. There's strong emotion, a protagonist the player cares deeply about and wants to succeed, a strong build to the climax as Ellie gets closer and closer to finding Abby, only for Abby to end up confronting her in a place she thought was safe. It felt to me like we had another classic on our hands until the momentum wasn't just sent to a screeching halt, it was quite literally reversed. You have to replay everything you just played, but as Abby now. But now let's take a look at Abby's story. Some of you watching might get upset when I say this, but I don't think Abby has a bad story. It just absolutely does not fit inside the first half of this game. Yes, there are thematic parallels, and yes, you do need her and her story to fulfill the cycles of violence theme that Neil Druckmann has talked about so much the way the game is presently constructed. But while I don't think the Abby story is bad, I do feel that I can say it's objectively weaker than the Joel and Ellie stories. To me, it could have been a nice companion piece to their journey, but within the context of this game, it just feels unnecessary. The unnecessary feeling comes mostly from its attempt to create and establish new characters, new factions, and new conflicts in the midst of occurring events, then asking the player to still be invested in those previously occurring events when the story finally gets around to them again. It also doesn't help that the new characters, factions, and conflicts feel way too familiar for them to be from The Last of Us' less traditional version of a zombie apocalypse world. The conflicts between the wolves and the scars feel more like something out of The Walking Dead than The Last of Us to me. And while I grew to like both Lev and Yara, neither one of them had the same impact that Ellie did as a player character companion in the first game. So when you combine familiar apocalypse plot points, the fact you're forced to play as a character that the game previously conditioned you to hate as the main villain, less compelling parallel versions of a character from the original game, and the fact that the story takes place right smack dab in the middle of a previously thrilling climax to a story about a character I already cared very deeply for, it makes for a rather long and frustrating detour that never really gets us back to where we thought we were going. This is why structural pacing is so important. When removed from the context of emotion, momentum, and rhythm, The Last of Us Part 2's structure seems like a really interesting idea. But when you're playing the game and completely locked into the story, it's impossible to shake the frustrating and unsatisfying feeling of being sucked out of the story's flow and forced to start that rhythm over again. This ultimately leads to an initially unconscious hesitation toward the disrupting element, which eventually turns into frustration and disdain. As I said earlier, I wanted to love The Last of Us Part 2. Even as we approached the ending on the beach, I felt like there were things that could slightly redeem the story that was here. One of those things for me would have been if Ellie had mercy killed Abby. Imagine if Ellie arrives on the beach and sees Abby hung up on that pillar. Sadly, Lev's been killed and Abby is too strong-willed to die, but she's barely hanging on and she asks Ellie to kill her. Ellie hesitates because she'd finally be getting what she wanted, but it would also be giving Abby what she wants. Regardless, Ellie goes through with it anyways, and ultimately breaks the cycle of violence that way. I think that would have been a really emotionally resonant ending for both Ellie and even for Abby as a character that I could never get on board with. I really think The Last of Us Part 3 will make or break the ending we got in this game though. Letting Abby live felt to me like a decision to keep the franchise going in a different direction. I hope this isn't the case. Don't get me wrong, I'm sure we'll see more Abby in the future, but I really hope we don't abandon Ellie. Neil Druckmann and the Naughty Dog team are fantastic storytellers, and even though this game's story didn't work for me, they are responsible for a ton of my favorite video game stories. So I have full faith in them to change my mind about this as we sit like Ellie on the foggy beach shore and look toward the franchise's murky future. Alright everybody, if you made it to the end of my video, thank you so much for listening to my thoughts on The Last of Us Part 2. It's a game that's definitely controversial, and it's a game that almost everyone has an opinion on, even if they haven't played the game. If you like this video and you want to see more, please subscribe. I'm new to YouTube, so your likes, comments, and your subscription will really help me out. If you have more games that you'd like to see me break down like this, please leave that in the comment section below. And also let me know your thoughts on The Last of Us Part 2. As I said, everybody has an opinion on this game, so I'm sure you have something passionate to say about it. Thank you all for watching. I'll see you in the next episode.